All right, A-Push students, here we go again. All right, before we get started with Chapter 3, I realized I kind of made a mistake. I know it's hard to believe, but I did make a mistake. And I left Georgia off Chapter 2, so you should probably turn back to your Chapter 2 notes if you didn't already get that information from the book, and let's talk about Georgia a little bit. All right, there was significant conflict between Spanish Florida. Remember, Florida is Spanish, and the Carolinas. All right, Spain is Catholic. We know that the English are not. There's always been this rivalry between Spain and England. All right, and so Catholic Spain hated all the Protestants on their borders. All right, and that led to the Anglo-Spanish Wars, where the Spanish were conducting border raids into Carolina. Sometimes they would do the attacking themselves. Sometimes they would just incite local Native Americans to attack. But they were doing everything they could to basically be a pain in the butt for the Carolinas. All right. By 1700, Carolina had grown too strong to be wiped out by the Spanish, but that didn't stop the Spanish from being annoying. Right. They could still incite Native Americans. They could still do border raids, things along those lines. That's going to lead to Georgia. All right, Georgia is developed as a buffer colony. All right, the chief purpose was to create a buffer between the valuable Carolinas, where they were making a lot of money, all right, and the dangers of Spanish Florida and as well as French Louisiana. All right, they received subsidies from the British government to offset the cost of their defense. All right, they did do some exporting of silk and wine and some things, so they did have some economic prosperity. But for the most part, they were there to defend the Carolinas against the Spanish and to a lesser extent the French. All right, Georgia over time is going to be a haven for people that fall into debt. They get thrown in prison. All right, the British have this kind of tradition of taking people out of prison and just throwing them places, right? It's how Australia got started. They just found this island and said, okay, all you prisoners, go there. All right, so that Georgia kind of becomes that as well. All right, because of that, because it's really founded, and most of the people that lived there were people that were poor. They were determined to keep slavery out. All right, they saw slaves as taking jobs away from them. They wanted to keep slavery out. Now we know over time that that's going to fail, and by 1750, there's going to be slavery in Georgia, and that will continue to grow once the American Revolution happens. All right, now let's get into what Chapter 3 is about, settling the northern colonies, all right, the New England colonies. All right, we're going to notice there's going to be pretty significant differences between the Chesapeake colonies, the southern colonies, and the northern colonies, all right? So let's talk about the Mayflower Compact first. All right, 41 male passengers are going to form the civil body politique. Sounds really cool. All right, that promises to write and obey just and equal laws for the general good of the colony. The Mayflower Compact is important. All right, we're getting the idea of democracy to America and self-government in the colonies. All right, the king's a long way away now. There's a lot less to worry about him. All right, so there's going to become this tradition both in the North and in the South of self-government, of democracy, and over time, that's going to help lead up to the American Revolution. All right, all the colonies are going to practice some form of self-government. All right, William Bradford, who was a self-taught scholar, he was elected 30 times to be the governor of the Plymouth settlement. All right, winning any election 30 times is pretty impressive. He had to get elected every year. All right. He was now, when we talk about the northern colonies, we're going to talk a lot about religion. The southern colonies, we talked a lot about money, right? Tobacco, rice, that kind of thing. All right. The northern colonies is a lot about religion. So he is really worried about settlements of non-Puritans, all right, people who wanted to purify the Anglican Church, all right, which was the Church of England, from all Catholic remnants. All right. And he didn't want that corrupted. All right, so he's going to write a pamphlet, article, whatever you want to call it, called A Model of Christian Charity, and that's going to be really, really important. All right, by 1629, we're going to get the foundation of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. All right, they're going to get a royal charter to found this. They wanted to escape attacks by conservatives in the Church of England. Again, this is a religious foundation of a colony. They didn't want to leave the church. They weren't separatists. That's why it says non-separatists. They didn't want to break away from the English church. They wanted to get rid of its impurities. And when you hear impurities, read Catholic ritual. They didn't like Catholic ritual. All right, so unlike the foundation of Jamestown, which is pretty rough, they're going to have 1,000 people who are going to set off in 11 very well-stocked ships in 1630 to found this. They're going to establish a colony. Boston is going to be the hub of that colony. All right, and we're going to see more and more people come, especially when we get into the 1630s. We're going to call it a Great Migration. Now, there's going to be a number of great migrations in U.S. history. Don't get on me about it. I didn't name them. I'm sorry. There's a lot of them. You got to figure them out. This is the first. All right, we're going to lead up to the English Civil War in England in the 1630s, and that's really why we're going to see a lot of people fleeing to the New World. All right, we're going to have about 70,000 Puritans who are going to come to America. A lot of them are going to settle in the northern colonies. All right, and we're going to have about 20,000 other people who are going to come to Massachusetts too. It's not all Puritans, mainly Puritans, but not all. All right, John Winthrop is a well-off attorney. He was a manor lord in England. All right, not really all that important. However, the fact that he became the first governor of Massachusetts is. All right, he believed that God had called him to lead there. He believed he was chosen by God. He's going to serve as governor or deputy governor for 19 years. All right. Now, that's not going to always, not everything's going to go real perfect in these Bible colonies. We're going to have some people who are going to rebel against the Puritan faith. All right, especially when it was just Puritans, you had pretty good social harmony. All right, but when more and more different groups started to come, you're going to start to get conflict. All right, so the Quakers are going to come. The Quakers are going to be discriminated against through fines, floggings, banishments, even executions. All right, Anne Hutchinson is going to be one of the first major rebels. All right, one of the key Puritan beliefs is that in predestination, God's already decided whether we're saved or not. All right, so she comes up with a relatively logical concept that if I'm truly saved, God's already chose me. Why do I have to obey any laws? Why can't I just do whatever the heck I want? All right, that's something that was called antinomianism. Don't think you really need to know that. All right. But therefore, because of God's grace, I'm freed from all laws and all moral standards. I can do whatever the heck I want. All right. Now, obviously, the Puritans don't quite see it that way. They're going to end up kicking her out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. She's going to end up traveling to what will become known as Rhode Island with her children and help organize a new settlement there that'll become Rhode Island. There's Anne Hutchinson stating her case in front of the Puritan Council. All right. She really was a brilliant woman. She confounded the Puritan leaders for days. Every time they thought they had an argument that would defeat her ideas, she had one that would counteract that. She finally bragged that she'd received her beliefs directly from God, so she bypassed all this Puritan Council stuff. All right. Now, direct revelation is even more serious. That's heresy, okay? That goes against the faith. Why? Well, let's think about that. If God's talking to me, therefore I'm pretty powerful, right? If God chose to talk to me, which he really doesn't, though he probably should, I'm a powerful person. So that's actually going to be a more serious charge, and that's really what's going to get her kicked out right now. All right, and again, she's going to travel to Rhode Island. Later, she'll travel to New York. And then she and her family are going to be killed in an Indian attack in Westchester County. But Anne Hutchinson is going to be the first sign of cracks in this Puritan ideal. All right. John Winthrop, of course, thought, yeah, God sent the Native Americans to kill her. Give me a break. All right. Roger Williams is going to be another Puritan rebel. He's a young, popular minister in Salem. He wants to break away from the Anglican Church. All right. He is a separatist. He does not like the Anglican Church anymore. He feels it's too corrupted, and he wants to break away. Therefore, he's going to condemn the Massachusetts Bay Charter, which was specifically chartered to the Puritans. All right. He also condemns it because it didn't give fair compensation to the Native Americans in the area. He was one of the first to say, hey, listen, this is their land. Why are we taking it and not giving them anything for it? Not going to make him really popular. People that are stealing from other people generally don't like it pointed out. All right. He's also going to deny the authority of the civil government to regular religious behavior. Separation of church and state. Again, something that's going to make its way into our Constitution and our lives all the way till today. All right. In 1635, he was found guilty of preaching new and dangerous opinions. And again, just like Anne Hutchinson, he is exiled. All right. He's going to flee to Rhode Island. All right. Some people wanted to send him all the way back to England because they were afraid that he would found a competing colony, which he does. All right. He founds this colony in Rhode Island. Remarkable political freedom in Rhode Island. Universal male suffrage, all right? At first, they allowed any male, as long as you were male, you could vote. I mean, let's not talk crazy talk. They weren't ready to let women vote yet, all right? But any male being able to vote was crazy, all right? Almost every place else had either a religious or a property qualification to allow you to vote, all right? Later on, that is going to be restricted by a property qualification, all right? Oppose special privilege for any kind, for any reason, for anybody. Freedom of opportunity for all. All right, Rhode Island becomes known as the sewer, okay, or Rogues Island, because it becomes like this dumping ground for unbeliever and religious dissenters. So, when you hear people like me say, why do we call it Rhode Island? It's neither a road nor an island. The answer is it's a kind of a bastardification of this term, Rogues Island, all right, which was called because people were sent there. All right, it's more liberal than any other colony throughout all of kind of the pre-American Revolution, and to this day, it's still a pretty liberal area. All right. Again, just like we had the Powhatan Wars in the South, we're going to have the Pequot Wars in the North. Okay, they were a very powerful native tribe in the Connecticut River Valley. All right, and that's going to lead to the war. All right. The English settlers, along with some other Native American allies who didn't like the Pequots because the Pequots were powerful, all right, are going to end up attacking a village. They're going to set fire to their homes. They're going to flee, shoot the fleeing survivors, all right, and the Pequot tribe is virtually annihilated, all right, in one fell swoop. All right, that leads to an uneasy peace, which is going to last about 40 years, basically because the Pequots know that at this point they can't rise up against the settlers. All right, that's going to change with King Philip's War. All right, the natives figure out that the only way for the Native Americans to resist was to unite multiple different tribes uniting against the white settlers. All right, Metacom, all right, who was called King Philip by the white settlers, but his real name is Metacom, so this is actually should be called Metacom's War, but of course the British are going to win, so they write the history, all right, is going to be this great leader which is going to unite all these tribes who oftentimes had their own problems, their own battles, and their own wars, but they're going to unite against the white settlers, all right, they're going to have a number of different united attacks and coordinated attacks on white settlements throughout New England. All right, and basically they're going to force a lot of the frontier settlements to kind of retreat back into Boston. So they're going to push the white settlers from the west back into Boston. All right. That'll change later, obviously. All right. This is going to lead to what's called the Dominion of New England. All right, and it's to bring the colonies under the English rule to kind of reinforce English rule over the colonies. It's to stop colonial smuggling, all right, and it's also to defend the colonies from the French and the Native Americans, all right. The English are going to take turns kind of not caring about what happens in the colonies and then trying to strongly restrict them, all right, and then they're not going to care, something that we'll talk about later called salutary neglect, and then they're going to try to restrict them. And when that happens over and over and over again, all right, that's going to cause problems. It's no different than if your parents would let you do whatever you want, all right, and then all of a sudden, every once in a while, they say, no, I'm going to be strict for a couple months, and you can't do anything. And then after a couple months, they say, do whatever you want. And then a couple months later, they're like, no, you can't do anything. You got to stay home. I'm going to ground you for everything, all right? At some point, you'd get tired of it. And that's really what's going to end up, again, leading us to the American Revolution, all right? So although we're not going to get the American Revolution for 150 years, 100 years, all right, it's going to, the roots of it are starting already, okay? So Sir Edmund Andros, who's the king's representative, is going to restrict town meetings. He's going to restrict the press. He's going to restrict what's taught in schools. He's going to revoke land titles from different people in New England. So you're going to see the king already starting to try to get control over this. All right, and you're going to see taxes, and that's going to be important as we move on. All right, this is going to collapse after a revolution in England called the Glorious Revolution. And again, we're going to go back to this idea of salutary neglect. All right, in which case the English are just going to kind of ignore what's going on in the New World. All right, New York. All right, in 1609, Henry Hudson is going to sail into Dutch East India. All right, he's going to be sailing to the Hudson River for the Dutch East India Company. He's going to claim the area that is now New York for the Dutch. All right, the Dutch West India Company, a different company, is going to establish what's called New Netherland. All right, it's going to be a quick profit. That's what they're looking for here. They're looking for a quick profit. They're looking to take advantage of the fur trade. All right, they're going to buy Manhattan for the Indians. The Indians, one of the problems that we're going to see is they didn't really understand that they were selling their land. All right, so it really wasn't a true transaction. All right. The Dutch did not allow freedom. There was no free speech. There was very harsh governors. All right, very little, if any, religious tolerance. All right, so New York is going to be founded by the Dutch. Now we'll see. Obviously, that's going to get taken over by the English relatively quickly. All right. You can still see, obviously, if you go to certain areas, you can see Dutch revival buildings in New York City. The New York State seal, New York City seal, has Dutch influence. You can see kind of the windmill there. Harlem and Brooklyn are both Dutch names. All right. A lot of the customs that are going to make their way from New York through the rest of the world, like Easter eggs and Santa Claus, all right, are all Dutch. So although the Dutch don't really have a very permanent settlement in the United States, in the New World, a lot of their customs are going to make their way into the New World because of the initial settlement in New York, which they called New Amsterdam. Okay. The Dutch were very cruel to the natives. The natives then are going to retaliate with, of course, what was called massacres, because, again, the winner's right to history. All right. The Dutch are going to build a giant wall to keep the natives out. And that, guys, is where Wall Street comes from. That street is where the wall originally was when the Dutch built it. Okay. All right, Pennsylvania is going to be even different. We talked a little bit about the Quakers earlier. All right, they originated in England, then they came to the New World. They were discriminated against in the New World. They were hated by authorities for a lot of different reasons. They refused to pay taxes to the Church of England because they didn't believe in the Church of England. They refused to take oaths. That was part of their religion. They also refused military service, all right, which was required in a lot of different areas of England, all right. Therefore, they are going to flee to the New World as well. All right, his family was owed a large debt from the British Crown, so therefore they gave him a land grant in the New World, which will become Pennsylvania. All right, Penn does govern the colony. He goes to Pennsylvania. We talked about how other ones kind of wanted to be this kind of landlord that stays in England, doesn't actually go there, but he's going to go. He's actually going to advertise in Europe for people to come to his colony. All right, he's going to promise land. He's going to promise them freedom. All right, and we're going to have what was called the frame of government, which kind of sets up the rules of the colony, which is going to guarantee an elected assembly, freedom of worship, open immigration, and fair treatment of Native Americans. Okay, the Quakers are going to be very dedicated to the idea that Native Americans should be treated fairly. All right. So the reason they were called Quakers is because they quaked and shook during some of their intense religious services and practices. Again, they offended a lot of people in England. We talked about that. They believed everyone was a children of God, so therefore they refused to treat the upper classes with deference. None of this bowing and my lord and all that other stuff. All right, everybody's a child of God, so you're no better than I am. All right, they refused to take their hats off in deference to the king or to the upper classes. All right, and therefore everybody was addressed as a commoner. All right. English, in the English language, the way you spoke to those of the upper class was different than the way you spoke to the commoners. And commoners had a language that was much different than the upper class, okay? See My Fair Lady, which is a great play with Henry Higgins, and kind of trying to change a commoner to speak like a upper class. All right, so that's another reason the Quakers weren't really well liked, okay? Penn paid for his land that he took from the natives. All right, now there's some historical debate on whether he paid fair value, but I think he probably tried to at least give them a legitimate value for what he was doing. All right, therefore the Quakers were able to go along among the Indians unarmed. This is the one place in the English colonies where there was actually really good relations at first between the Native Americans and the colonies. But as more non-Quaker Europeans came into Pennsylvania, they're not going to treat the natives the same way. Therefore, that's going to undermine the course of the actions of the Quakers, and we're going to have war with the natives because of that relatively quickly. All right, New Jersey. New Jersey's Pennsylvania's neighbor. It was received, the people received, the lords received that area from the Duke of York. Okay, many New Englanders who tried to plant tobacco, all right, and the soil wore out, are going to move to New Jersey to try to continue that there. So there was some of that going on in the north as well. All right, West New Jersey is sold to the Quakers, and East New Jersey is eventually acquired by the Quakers too. So New Jersey is going to become another Quaker stronghold at first. And actually, it wasn't until 1702 where that becomes East and West New Jersey are combined into one colony. All right, Delaware was named after the Lord de la Warre, who was the military governor of Virginia in 1610. Talked a little bit about him. Remember, he was the one that kind of led that perpetual warfare against the Native Americans. All right, it's closely associated with Penn's colony, but in 1703 it was granted its own assembly, but it was remained under the control of Pennsylvania until after the American Revolution. So Delaware is basically a part of Pennsylvania until after the American Revolution. All right, guys, that is the end of chapter 2 and chapter 3. Again, keep reading the books. So important, guys, that you get the kind of the big picture. All right, first test is coming up soon, so keep working. Out.